The Psychology of Town Planning. Hello everyone, welcome to Signposts for Living with Dr. Kirsten Hunter, and we have got Jake here. Actually Jacob Hart, but we're going to go with Jake, yeah?
Jake's good.
That's good. Thank you so much for coming.
No worries. Thank you for having me.
No worries. Your first podcast?
It is my first podcast.
Were you nervous?
No, not really.
I love it.
I'm excited.
That's good. That's great. So The Psychology of Town Planning, kept the title simple.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I've never spoken to anyone who does town planning, but I've always been fascinated by it.
Cool.
Because from where I sit, there's a lot of psychology because it's about people.
Yeah.
And trying to find solutions and what they need. And obviously there's a lot of very complicated, knowledge bases that I don't know about. But so tell me a bit about your history with town planning and what do you do? Where have you come from? How did you get into it? Give us a bit of a clue about you.
So I'm probably more artistic by nature. More artistic, creative. I had a gap year out of school. I went and did interior design to start with.
Yeah.
And then I finished with that and ran bottle shops and various different physical activities. And then I ended up in the transport and warehousing industry, and managed a team of 28 people across 3 8-hour shifts. And from there I went into logistics, and then from logistics into a particular transport industry and working for a family-owned company. And my manager at the time was wanting me to become the state manager for this particular transport.
How old were you?
I was 23.
Of course. State manager at 23.
Yeah.
Okay.
He said to me, you're destined for bigger things. His name was David Jones, actually, like the retail shop. And he was a very charismatic man.
Memorable.
I really enjoyed his company. And he said, I want to put you through uni and do an MBA. Let's take you to a uni open day. So I went to an open day at QUT Gardens Point in Brisbane in southeast Queensland.
Yeah.
And I have always wanted to do landscape architecture.
Really?
I've always been fascinated with the built environment and how humans interact in the built environment as opposed to the natural environment. Anyway, to cut a long story short, I fell in love with the idea of educating myself and not being in the transport industry. It was not what my passion was.
Yeah.
So I had the terrible task of telling David, thank you for your motivation, but I'm actually going to jump ship. And
you've inspired me to jump ship.
Yep, and I did. And I actually put down landscape architecture as my first preference, and then town planning because they shared the same first year.
Wow.
Both linked for very similar reasons for the first year, and I was accepted into town planning, did my first year of uni and thoroughly fell in love with it.
Really?
Town planning has 2 parts, very briefly. There's predominantly the strategic component of it, which looks at the design and legislation and all that kind of thing. And then there's the statutory part of it, which is really looking at the grassroots part of people making applications and where buildings go and that kind of thing. So it was more strategic, and I fell in love with that very much. And I studied and then the irony is that I got a job at a local council in southeast Queensland in Ipswich as a development assessment planner, which is statutory town planning. And
not
strategic, not the part that I fell in love with at university. But really what you're doing at that level in local government is dealing with people every single day. So you're working with people who come in that want to build a shed in their backyard that needs a town planning approval, or you could be working with a consortium who wants to build a shopping centre and a wharf and a brewery and everything in between. And so doing that component of town planning was fascinating. I really enjoyed that human interaction. And so I have done that both in Queensland and Victoria over the last nearly 20 years.
Yeah.
And we were living in Victoria, my family and I, and my wife got a job up here in Toowoomba in southeast Queensland, and we moved up here. I was still working for a Victorian local government remotely because I'd been doing that through COVID anyway.
Yeah.
And then I decided to bridge the gap and start my own town planning consultancy here in Toowoomba. And I did that 18 months ago. It's called Built Environment Consulting.
Okay.
And I finished up with the Victorian local government in December of last year, 2023. and it's been all guns a-blazing since then. So
Wow.
the passion of it is really helping people, to be honest. For me, that's my passion. It's where my personality traits lead me, is helping and assisting. Yeah.
And your enjoyment. And how long had that been a desire to set up your own business?
Probably ongoing for maybe 10 years. But
oh, really?
Yeah, but it just, like, I took a back seat with looking after our children while my wife was she was involved in COVID. She's a infectious diseases expert. So we swapped roles, and she was the primary money earner, if you could say that.
Yeah.
Had a much more focused career, and I looked after the boys and did work sort of part-time with local government, and I just really love town planning. I'm great. I really enjoy interacting with people. I'm great at getting things translated from everyday language into town planning speak, because that is a real thing. There's a lot of acronyms and things like that. So I've always wanted to have my own business. At some point, my dad did as well, and a lot of my family members have had them as well. And I thought, what better way to have the life you desire if you can decide when and where you're going to work and who you're going to work for. So
well,
we are.
I'm a big fan. I've had my own business for 20 years.
Wow.
Love it.
It's fantastic.
It is great. So can you explain what your business does? Can you?
Yeah. So my business is a town planning consultancy business. So I work with private certifiers who issue building approvals for people. I work with all kinds of professional consultants who produce a range of different information. So acoustic consultants, transport engineers, stormwater engineers, bushfire consultants. I work with all those kinds of people. And primarily what I do is, if people need to lodge a development application with council to get council's approval, town planning approval, then I prepare that information for them. So people generally come to me and say, this is what I want to do on my block of land. Can you tell me if I can do that or not? So I do what's called a preliminary assessment and tell them, yes, you can do that, but here are the things that you have to sort out or that you have to address. And then if it needs a town planning application, then I can lodge that for you and negotiate with council and act on your behalf to secure that permit.
So it's this essential bridge, isn't it, between the consumer who is running their own project and then the actual town planning government authority
at local government and state government levels I deal with. Predominantly local government, but I also delve into the state government component. Wow.
Is there a big demand in that?
Huge demand.
Really?
Yeah. Yep. I think I'm in a really niche corner though, because there's only me in my business. So town planning consultancies traditionally have large numbers of people. So you're dealing with a range of different consultants who are ultimately governed by the management group of that consultancy. Whereas everything you get from me is from me. I deal with you personally, and we have an ongoing relationship for either the duration of the application, or I even like to check in with my clients as well, just to see how their projects are going, because some of them really struggle to get through the process, and it is quite a process. And I just like to check in and see how everything's going, whether their house has been built or their property's been subdivided or whatever it happens to be.
Yeah, and I mean, we're stepping away from psychology here, but I have to ask the question, do you want to keep it as a sole practitioner? Do you want to keep it there?
I don't know that I can.
Oh, because it's expanding.
I'm getting so much work.
So expand or say no to people.
Yeah, essentially. But I also am conscious of the fact that once you start doing that and you're employing people, you're moving into that traditional model where it's not just people getting to talk to you.
Yeah.
They're having to talk to some
and
employee.
Your job is running a business.
That's right.
It's HR. Yep. It's not actually face-to-face with the clients and doing your work. Yeah. That's the tricky thing.
So I think there has to be a cap. There has to be a ceiling on what I can do. But that's because I like the personable approach that I have.
Yeah.
I like that personal interaction with my clients. It's one-on-one. I can tell them, or I can suggest to them, here, you need to talk to these people, or I could do that for you if you need me to, as part of my service, because I'm familiar with those people and practices. So,
well, I'm impressed. Now, can I share a very strange random thought, and I'll get to a point. Yes?
Sure, go for it.
I was thinking about our podcast, And I was thinking about our chicken run. Stay with me.
I will. I'm here.
We have approximately 12 chickens. I don't know because I can't count them all because they're never in one place. And 4 gorgeous ducks. They're little those Indian runner ducks.
Yeah,
really
awesome.
elegant. They're so cool. We also have 2 dogs, right? And one of them likes to eat duck. Would like to.
Oh yeah.
Not really interested in chicken. So, I with the boys, John was over visiting his family at the time, but with the boys, we created this chicken run.
Mm-hmm.
And so there I am in my quiet time contemplating this. And I was thinking about 2 areas. One, safety, functionality, food, water, safety, shelter.
Yep.
And then I started thinking, what's enjoyable for them? What's the pleasure?
Yeah.
Quality of life.
Yep.
And I thought, man, I wonder if that's what we're going to talk about.
There are absolutely. I love that. That's an awesome analogy. I think it's great.
I think it's amusing, but yeah, but it is. I mean, I'm trying to bring this really down to relatable language. Is it kind of like that? Is it needs with regard to, utilities and safety and the big picture and infrastructure, and then is that one section, and then is the next section quality of life, needing to have parks, needing to have standards where we're not kind of living in a shanty town. Is it like that? Is it those 2 worlds?
Yeah, very much so. There's really the high level
Hence
components.
The psychology.
Yeah. There's really high level components where we look at from a federal, so it's driven from federal government into state government into local government, and then that's enacted through a planning scheme which is adopted by the local government. So that really sets the parameters about where we're going to build things, where certain types of development can occur, and how it's going to be done. And then through that are a whole pile of strategic principles that are fed in. So when you're formulating a planning scheme, you're looking at the different principles about how you want your area to function, how you want your city to function. So these are all planning schemes are local government area related, and then they're driven into different sections through the zone that you place over land. So very much so you can look at where people want to live, what types of dwellings they want to live in, and then how they recreate and how they move about the city. So it's really looking at where you can have the particular types of dwellings, in this case dwellings, and then where the shopping centres are and where the local centres are, where the parks are. And then the services are kind of, they're provided as a natural way of occurring whilst the development expands, basically, or whilst the city expands. So they'll be already here. So, all your water and sewer and things are constructed. And then as you move into land where there's been no dwellings previously, then those services are extended out. So they're a basic requirement. Roads, water, telecommunications, sewer, that kind of thing.
And it's kind of a standard for Australia, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
This is the quality, this is the standard of living that we insist on.
Yep. And in most cases, that's at a very, very micro level, that's driven through Australian standards, established Australian standards, and then the standards that are applicable through the local government requirements as well.
So do different governments have different standards?
They can do, yeah. So for parks, for example, when you go to a local park, so there's tiers of parks. So there might be a citywide park, a local park, and then a neighbourhood park.
Right.
And so, citywide, neighbourhood, local, in that order.
Yep.
So the citywide parks might have to have a certain number of playground equipment or certain area, so cricket pitches or football ovals or something like that. Then you get into neighbourhoods where there's less of that, and then the very closest level is the local park level. So all of those parks have different standards, and then those standards are different depending on which local government you're in.
I get it.
Yeah.
Yep. And would you say from a town planner's perspective, this might sound weird, if you and your gorgeous wife for sale were to say, okay, let's move in Australia, do you actually look at Australia and go, okay, better quality of life in this area because there's better standard of town planning?
100%.
No way, really?
Yeah.
I was kind of joking when I said that.
No,
really?
I definitely do. One of the things that we grapple with when we're trying to look at different properties is my wife looks at it, Sal looks at it very much so from a where's the schools, where are the parks, where are the shopping centres?
Yes.
I look at it from where are the roads, where's it going to flood, can we get out in an emergency, those kinds of things. So
wow.
She found a beautiful house a little while ago that was sort of in a gully. Mm. And when I jumped on the internet and started doing some research, I said to her, no way, this is there's when it rains, basically rainwater is going to be funneled through this house and this property underneath, which is why it was a 2-story house and there was nothing built underneath it. I said, I'm not interested in anything like that, nor should we be from a safety or risk perspective. So, but yeah, certainly I love the Queensland planning system. I love the Victorian planning system. It's probably my favourite in the whole country. And so Victoria in southern eastern Australia is an awesome spot for town planning. So many people at the local level are involved in that, and they're permitted to be involved because of the way the legislation is structured. So if if somebody lodges a town planning application on the property next door to you, and you don't like it, and you're able to object to it on planning grounds, and council goes ahead and approves it, well, then you can appeal that to the state government, and you actually go to the Victorian Civil and Administrative Tribunal, and you can represent yourself as a neighbour. Whereas in Queensland, you can still do that, but the process is actually led through the Planning and Environment Court. So you can't be self-represented. You have to hire a barrister or a solicitor.
More hoops, expensive.
More expensive.
Less accessible.
Yep, absolutely.
Well, I like Victoria then.
Yeah, it was good fun. It was really good fun. It also puts the decision makers front and centre of defending their decisions.
Yeah.
So if, as a local government employee, town planner,
transparency,
you refuse that application, you have to be able to represent that and your case in VCAT, or the Victorian Civil and Administrative Tribunal. And so it really forces you as a local government employee to think about and make sure that you've got that decision correct. It's a great system. I really enjoyed working in Victoria.
I was racking my brain thinking about what elements in town planning are important for our psychology. I have to admit, the only thing I thought of was parks and greenery, which is so incredibly important, not to have houses just on top of each other with concrete everywhere. Can you think of other elements that is it routinely part of your process where, other elements that are important for mental health? Yeah,
absolutely. So certainly green space and access to green space is probably one of the most paramount examples, because as we move into higher densities, our cities get bigger. People rely on those areas to recreate, to get out and go for a walk and clear your head, A lot of the other things really come down to design elements. So if you're talking about a multi-storey building, an apartment block, for argument's sake, you don't really want to have everything completely sealed off. You want to be able to have some level of ventilation or cross-ventilation, so you have natural airflow.
Right.
You have light exposure. You have a certain amount of light coming into your dwelling. It depends on which way the dwelling faces as well. So, if you go to buy off the plan, and I don't know if many people do this, but this would be something that I would absolutely do as a town planner. If you were looking at a floor plate of an apartment block, I know here in Southeast Queensland, I wouldn't want to be on the western side of the building, because you get the hot afternoon sun. It means then your cooling is going to be a lot, the energy for cooling is going to be a lot higher.
Yep.
So when I'm thinking about the psychology of town planning, it's really about where you're going to be designing the things that you need to be in this development, and how they're going to be able to provide that for the occupants of that building or facility when it's constructed. So it's not just about green space, although green space is quite a strategic thinking point. Whereas when you get down to architecture and looking at how the building is designed, where your cross ventilation is, where your living spaces are, where your service entries are, those kinds of things, you're making sure that the balance of those is adequate for the people who are going to be occupying that building later on.
And the awareness of green space, as an example, is that a fairly modern awareness, or has that always been around?
It's always been around, yeah.
Right.
If you go back and look, like, so for example, and this is by no means factual, but if you look at the history of town planning, of planning cities, when we started becoming part of a modernised culture, it was necessary, both from an artistic point of view and a relaxation point of view, to have green space, and then to have that space linked with how our the rest of the city was going to be laid out. So if you look at some of the traditional European cities and how they were laid out, if you look at places like Melbourne, for example, with the grid layout that it's got, all of the green spaces are linked to things like what was traditionally referred to as the central business district, and then to where everybody lived as well. So it was easy for you to get access to those things regardless of what your backyard was like. Because those were civic spaces. They're really important to celebrate what happens in the city, what happens with the people of that city as well, or that town, or whatever it might be. So as a civic space, they were always important, and they were always considered in town planning.
I often think of New York when I think about town planning, because, Central Park, what would New York be like without Central Park?
It'd be pretty cold and pretty miserable, I would imagine.
Yeah, it would just be a cement jungle, really.
Yeah.
And, where you look up and you can't see the sky, really, because the high-rises are just so intense. But yet you've got Central Park, and that's called the lungs of New York, I believe.
Yeah. Yep.
And it's just this sense of, it's okay that this is so incredibly hectic because we've got Central Park.
Yeah.
I think it's a great example.
Absolutely. It's a fascinating structure in terms of where it's situated within New York itself.
Why is that? What do you mean?
So when you look at where the buildings have been built up to the boundary, so a lot of the photos, if you jump on and Google, say, photos of Central Park, you can see that there is a very clear boundary between the built environment and the park.
Yes.
So these streets that have just got these long, straight walls of buildings, a lot of them that face onto the buildings that face onto Central Park would fetch far more money because of the views and because of the access they have to that open space, but also because of the way that the wind travels through those corridors as well. So you're getting fresh wind off the park itself. So there's a whole range of things that are considered when you're talking about established cities like that as to why you would want to be located next to a premium open space like Central Park. So it's relevant in any town planning scenario. People will change what they need as they go through their cycle of life. So when you're young, I'll speak from my experience, put it this way. When I was young...
Currently young.
Yeah. Younger. When I was younger...
We'll go with that, yeah.
I wanted to be in the CBD. I wanted to be in a high-rise apartment. I wanted to have access to all the restaurants and the river and things like that. Then we got married. We lived in an inner-city apartment, and then we moved a little bit further into a townhouse. And then as we had children, we moved further out, and the things that we looked for primarily were schools and recreation spaces, so green space, schools, parks, and then what was the easiest route to get to our families? What was the fastest route to get to our families?
And that sort of thing.
Yep. And now we live here in Toowoomba in southeast Queensland, and we are still focused on what's best for getting our kids to school and what's easiest for getting our access to our services that we use. As we get older, that will probably likely change more, because it'll be where can we get access to our children and grandchildren, assuming that they still want to have anything to do with us. And then what's going to get us to the places that we want to go to the fastest. So we want to be closer to the water, for example, because we're about 2.5 hours from the water here.
Yeah.
So we'd like to be closer to the water. And so our focus will then be more into not necessarily a traditional house with a backyard, but probably a smaller townhouse with a smaller yard, but within walking distance to the water and shops or movies or things like that. So
priorities definitely change. I'm on an acre, 17 minutes from here, and that's our priority, is to just have, not to run out of things to get out and do, and have room for my chicken run, of course. But I wasn't at this point earlier in my life. I'm ready now for that. So it's really interesting. And it's because I outgrew my last garden because it was just too small.
I would love to be on a farm.
Would you really?
But my wife and 2 boys aren't really interested. So
it is a team sport.
It is a team sport. You're absolutely right. Yeah, I love the idea of being self-sufficient.
Yes.
Being out in the open space and, being able to talk to your animals and stand there and watch the sunset.
We could not live off my vegetable patch. It looks pretty. Okay, so here's another thought. Here we are in Toowoomba, southeast Queensland, and I'm aware that we have outgrown our hospital a long time ago, a very long time ago, and now we're getting a new hospital. So there must be lots of situations where public amenities, like hospitals, there we have populations increasing, and then it puts pressure on the government with regard to this very big investment. I don't know whether there's an obligation to have community libraries, community halls. I don't know any of this stuff. So I guess that's another layer, isn't it? And that's
absolutely.
Big bucks.
Yeah, yep. So that's usually, or those things are usually, well, let's talk about infrastructure first of all. So things like hospitals, they're usually here in Queensland, they're a state-driven component. They're really designed at the local level. So where do we need them? Where does our local planning scheme think that where's our population growth being driven? And then what's the timing for that? And then state government will then get involved with the provision of those services. Now, if you're a state, in this instance, the hospital you're talking about is a state-owned facility, it's a Queensland Health facility, then it's directed by the state where that money's going to be spent, where the facility is going to be built. If you're a private hospital, privately funded, that's a different story. You go and talk to council and you say, hey, council, we want to build a hospital and here's where we want to build it. Most of these facilities, generally speaking, in these sort of places are already set up. So some of our private hospitals have been built for quite some time. When you're talking about the built environment expanding, going into new areas, so urban growth into these places, that's when really town planning starts to take effect in where are we going to put all these things? Where's the hospital got to go? Where does the bus interchange go? Where does the primary shopping centre go?
Oh, transport.
Yeah.
Hadn't even thought of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So Toowoomba has I guess you could say, a fairly small public transport network. We don't have any trains.
No, I'd say it's not that impressive.
No, it's not. It's awful, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But when you're talking bigger cities, so extending the heavy gauge rail network, is that the most appropriate way to do it? Or are you looking at a light rail system like the Gold Coast did? So when you compare somewhere like, say, Toowoomba, which is you have your traditional CBD and the growth has happened around it, so it's sort of like a circular design, whereas the Gold Coast has developed in a ribbon in a north-south arrangement. So rather than having heavy gauge rail all the way through, they've developed the light rail system. So it bridges the gap between where the heavy gauge rail stops and then how do you get to those other important places while still being able to be connected. So you don't need anywhere near the space or the land with light rail that you do with heavy gauge rail. So light rail was the best option in that
solution.
Instance.
Yeah.
Yep. So
very interesting.
All of these things, when you're talking about new urban growth or what they call greenfield development. So greenfield is where nothing's ever been before. So traditional farming land or open space that's then turned into a city or an urban area. That's where you're looking at, like, it's a clean slate. How do we set these suburbs up?
Is that when your creative side would be able to come out?
Yeah.
Oh, look at that.
I love that kind of stuff. It's awesome. It's really interesting because Victoria developed a policy called the 20-minute city. So 20-minute community, I think it is, and where can you get to within 20 minutes? And so you end up with these like little local areas dotted all over the place that you could potentially function most of your daily habits within that area.
Got quite a few, friends in surrounding Melbourne, and they say they never go to Melbourne. They live in their own little cities, small cities, and they're relatively self-sufficient.
Yeah,
Yeah, like
and it's a traditional model that we kind of moved away from.
Like a
little
village.
bit. It's exactly like a village.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's really copied off the back of the way European cities have traditionally been designed. So you have the little neighbourhoods, the local shops, local shopping centre, the services that are provided within that neighbourhood area, and then you really only need to go outside of that area for big services or big events or whatever it might be.
Special occasions.
Mm-hmm.
It reduces transport enormously.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yep. Okay, I'm dying to ask you this. Ready?
Yep.
I might offend a lot of people. But you know when there's a lot of intense housing and you look out and all you see is this expanse of what I see is very similar coloured roofs, usually that light grey, silver, I don't know. And to me, I always refer to them as monopoly houses. Do you know what I mean? And, you know, the one side of the house might actually hit the fence line. And I guess I understand affordable housing. I really do. And I'm not sounding like I don't want to be a snob remotely. But I look at that and I think, what's that like? What's the quality of living? And how much is this about optimal money being made from developers as opposed to, you know, big picture decisions? So what are your thoughts on monopoly houses?
It's a really fine balancing act.
Yeah. You get what I mean, though.
I do. Yeah, and a lot of people that I talk to have traditionally grown up in, the Australian dream. So a small house, 800 square metres to 1,000 square metre block of land, or 32 perches as it used to be. And they're used to that open space. They're used to that distance between their neighbours' houses and them. You know, unless you're really shouting at somebody, then you probably won't hear them. The thing that we have to balance as town planners is how do we get the cost of housing down when the cost of construction is going up. And so when you're expanding those areas and you're opening new land for traditional style housing, how do we balance the expense of extending all those services out to those areas with what's the yield, how many houses are we going to be able to fit there that makes it economical? Because
more affordable.
Unfortunately, the development industry is driven by cost.
Of course.
Regardless, somebody has to pay for these developments. And so if they can't make them affordable for their businesses, and a lot of them don't make the profits that everybody thinks that they do.
Really?
Yeah,
you say the word developer and everyone thinks they're rolling in gold.
Yeah, yep. Everybody does. But the reality is that they're not. It's becoming harder and harder and harder as we get along. And we need them to produce housing for the housing market.
Well, we have a housing crisis, don't we?
Absolutely.
We don't more people than houses here.
Yep.
Yeah.
And the one way of curbing that really is high density living. And so provided you can balance a great high density design with access to essential services and access to things like green space, you can have a very good model. And it's been done many, many times. There's some terrible models as well, and we've learnt from our mistakes, I think. But if you can have those high-density developments and people living in apartments that have access to all of those things like transport, entertainment, green space, then they genuinely can work. It's a matter of changing perspectives. So as this is fairly out there, but as the population ages and we're getting more and more people of my parents' generation, at least anyway, retiring and having access to enjoy their lives more, their housing options are different for a range of different reasons. Affordability is one of them, scale and size is another, and location. But the other thing too is that we're building right now, town planning is providing for an industry that's building houses that are having families that occupy them, and those family units are changing. So we don't have families now of 5, 6, 10 children anymore. You know, it might be 1 or 2, or these might predominantly, they might be individuals living in an apartment. Now, does one individual need a 4-bedroom apartment? Well, one, they probably don't want to pay for that, but there's a lot of unused space. So how do we balance the needs of the family unit now versus what our ageing population wants and everything in between? So to come back to your original question about the monopoly houses.
Do you like that term?
Yeah, because it really fits. You know, they look similar.
They do, from a distance.
There's a fairly monochromatic colour scheme.
Why do they do that? I don't think it's good.
It's trend. So a lot of things that, television shows promote, there might be trends. Victoria, you might be surprised to hear this, but Victorian houses are predominantly built with dark, if not black roofs.
No, why?
Well, it was really the look, I guess, and the access to materials that they had at the time, so slate tiles and things like that. But now, environmentally, we are absolutely moving away from that because it changes the function of the house and requirements for cooling and heating. So now there's actually legislation that says you can't build a dark roof in Victoria. Yeah.
Really? Yeah.
Absolutely. You have to have lighter coloured roofs for the energy efficiency predominantly. So anyway, the monopoly houses are built in a way because for a range of different things, but predominantly it's about getting volume, I think, and then balancing that as best as you can with the service provision that you have to have that's required to make these areas livable, enjoyable, and that people want to belong in. Housing affordability is a huge component of it.
Absolutely, yeah.
So if you can sell blocks of land and dwellings, or you can build your dwelling that you want on those blocks of land for a reasonable price that a family can have access to, great. Why wouldn't you do that? Because you know that's a saleable product. So all of these different components spill into each other for a range of different reasons that isn't always considered in the first analysis of why this is what it is.
I'm guessing you enjoy the complexity, all the variables.
I'm very much details orientated as a person.
Juggling it all.
And so piecing all the individual pieces of the puzzle together I enjoy the challenge. It's really interesting.
Isn't that great?
Yeah.
Did you study much psychology at university with town planning? Did they talk about, the human state, what humans need for their, health and mental health and physical health and community?
Yeah, because it was strategic based, the course that I did, design based, we did look at that. We did a sociology subject as well, which was fascinating.
Yeah.
And a lot of that comes into when you're a town planner, when you're doing community consultation. So sociology that we studied at university was about interacting with the public and figuring out how people interact and what it is that's important to them as individuals. So I found that really enjoyable, and I really enjoy that component of it, that communication component with my clients through my business. As a local government employee, that can be quite confronting as well, because you're representing council, you're going out there saying to the community, this is what we've prepared in terms of a planning scheme. Does this align with your values? Because there's a whole range of consultation that goes ahead when you're preparing a planning scheme for a city.
Yep.
And so you want to put that out there. You want to say, hey, here's things that we're considering. Is this what you want as a community? And you have to have a broad coverage of your community to be able to do that as well. And then you take that feedback as a local government and you formulate your town planning scheme. And then you put that back out for consultation again and you say, hey, these are all the things that we've considered. Is everyone accepting of these? And of course you won't, because you can't please everybody. But you have to look at the greater good for the greater number.
Yeah, there you go.
And so once you've done that, then you can put your planning scheme together and enact it. And so that consultation component of town planning is essential. But as a local government employee, that can be very confronting when people are absolutely against what you've proposed.
You've got to be on the front line, don't you, and be unpopular with people.
You have to.
Yeah.
You have to.
The big elephant I see in the room that I'm also curious about to ask you about is the environment. And, you say the greater good for the greater people. If you were to think long term, I think environment trumps a lot.
Mm-hmm.
That's town planning, and is
Yeah.
that a kind of a valued area, or is it kind of a thorn in the side because of trying to progress?
Depends who you talk to.
Right, yeah.
It's essential, I
Yeah.
think, regardless whether we like it or we don't. It's
Yep.
essential.
Yep.
And our regulators are making it essential. So federal government, state government, even the global community is making it essential. You also, to drill really quickly back into the micro level, if
Yep.
you have a development that you are proposing to construct as a developer, let's say a housing development, and you can't demonstrate to your purchasers that it is a sustainably designed development, then that might be to your detriment. Especially in a high-density city, for example, where you're proposing to build a building, a mixed-use building, let's say, that's part residential, part retail, part office. The people who occupy that want to make sure they're much more environmentally conscious these days. And they want to make sure that you've designed that building accordingly. So if you don't, one, it's going to be very difficult not to do it anyway because legislation requires it now. Two, if you can't promote it in a way that is successful because of what you've done, people won't be interested in buying it for the right reasons. They won't get you won't get social buy-in
Radio.
from your occupants.
Yeah.
And
Isn't it great that it's such a big focus?
it's a huge focus, yeah.
Has that been the last, say, 15 years, would you
Yeah.
say? Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. When we started looking at things like when you're constructing a housing development, a standard residential development, when you're ripping all of the topsoil and the trees and everything off it, what are you doing with that material? Then what are you doing when it rains? Where's all that overland flow going? Where's all the nutrients? Where's the soil running off to? What's happening in the creek? Are you looking after the local tributaries? So it started there in my experience in local government, and then it just steamrolled very, very quickly into all the other things that we have to do, which are really hugely important. I mean, one of the major things that I worked on in Victoria was mixed-use developments, and with the emergence of electric vehicles, charging stations became hugely important.
Of course, and increasingly so. They will. Yeah.
Well, the premise of reducing car parking provision for these types of developments to encourage people to walk more is one idea, which people grapple with. Why can't I park my car in this? I live in this building. Why can't I park? Why don't I have a parking space? That's ludicrous. Well, the premise is if you build the building in the right location and you have good access to public transport and all of the services that we were talking about, maybe you don't need a car. Maybe you can get around on a bike.
But people don't like not having choice.
Oh, they don't at all.
Which is fair.
It's fair.
Yeah.
And you can't build something like that here in Toowoomba for
Yeah.
argument's sake. Inner city suburbs of major capitals, absolutely you can.
Yeah. A lot of people don't have cars.
Yeah, that's right. So and electric vehicle stations, you want to be able to make sure that if you don't provide them right now, that your building can still retrofit for whatever the standard happens to be at the time. So even the forethought of how do you put the infrastructure in, or how do you accommodate for the infrastructure in 5 or 10 years' time, make sure you can do that too.
You probably weren't living here, but when in 2011, and there was massive floods here in Toowoomba, southeast Queensland, which is really a challenging, interesting thing because we're on a mountain. So we called it the tsunami on the mountain because it was a wave of water from incredible rain over a month. I wasn't here for that month. I was in Europe. And I came back 3 days later, there was a flood, and I'm like, what's going on? But it was horrendous. A lot of people died.
Yeah.
It was tragic. And everyone saw it. Everyone saw it. So I think everyone observed the council then going into action and creating all of these waterways where they were preventing. And I saw, a lot of investment in the community, a lot of interest, and it was an education in what I assume is town planning.
Yeah, absolutely.
You weren't here then?
No.
You're in Victoria?
I was in Victoria,
Yep,
yeah.
yep.
But I saw it all on TV. I was employed just before that with Ipswich City Council, who suffered quite badly as well.
Right, so that's our neighbouring city,
Yeah, between here and Brisbane.
Yep.
And it didn't matter where you worked in council, you just did what had to be done to help people out. A lot of my colleagues in Ipswich were extremely busy doing community service, helping clean buildings out once the floodwater had receded and things like that. So the way that then folds into town planning really is, what have we learnt from how these waterways are treated and what we do to stormwater and where it goes. So stormwater is a consideration of town planning. And then can you just pipe it into a concrete culvert? Is that the right way to do it? Or do you look at the quality of the water, slowing the water down by reinstating natural waterways? Causes filtration, it causes habitat growth, it causes places for people to play and enjoy and recreate, and then it actually works in a completely different way. Whether you could ever plan for an event that happened like 2011 because of the volume of stormwater, I would argue you probably couldn't, not to that level.
It was never imagined to have been possible.
No, and now we're considering things like the maximum probable flood. So when we're talking about floodwater in planning schemes at the moment,
is
probable maximum flood, like that's not just a...
Is 2011 the benchmark?
No, it's a combination of things. So sea level rise, weather patterns, local flooding that's occurred, that kind of thing. So it's an incredibly complex science.
Sea level, that's a whole other area with the environment, isn't it? I guess with you and your gorgeous wife, when you're wanting to move to the coast, you're not going to get too close to the sea levels.
No.
You'll be looking at that too.
And not too low either.
Not too low.
No.
Not too close, not too low.
Yep. It's got to be just right.
Tell you what, I've got more questions, but I'm gonna stop because I could just keep going. But thank you so much for coming along.
My pleasure.
Incredibly interesting, and all these questions that I didn't know to ask until we started talking.
Oh, that's part of the beauty of town planning.
That's it. And now we're going to have all these people signing up for town planning.
I hope so. Yeah. I hope so. It's a wonderful industry.
I love your passion.
Thank you. I really enjoy it. Thank you for having me. It's been awesome.
Absolute pleasure. Okay, everyone, if you want to catch me online, we've got the website KirstenHunterAuthor.com, Facebook and Instagram, Kirsten Hunter Author, TikTok, would you believe? I know, Dr. Kirsten Hunter. And I think we've got YouTube and everything else as well, but that's enough. Okay, thank you for coming.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Won't we?
Sounds great.
Yeah.
Thank you.